Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crisis Poetics, the War on Imagination. We'll begin tonight with a reading from both R.M. Haines, who goes by Matt to his friends, and Thom Eichelberger-Young, followed by a moderated discussion. We will open at the end for a quick Q&A. If you have questions, please save them for the end. If you place them in chat while discussion is happening, your girl might miss it. So with that, let's get started, and I'll introduce our first reader. R.M. Haines is the author of the books A Dark Address and Interrogation Days, and the chapbooks Travis, Parking Lot Horizon, 3 Essays, and Poem at the Going Rate. He runs Dead Mall Press, which donates half of its earnings and has raised over $3,000 in its 3 years of operation for mutual aid, anti-carceral, and social justice organizations, as well as for support in Gaza. He also posts essays on poetry, publishing, music, and DIY culture on his blog, Out of Its Wooden Brain. He lives in Dayton, Ohio, where he makes ends meet as an adjunct instructor online and at a community college. Welcome, Matt. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you to everyone for showing up. I really appreciate it. Haven't done many events like this, but it's pretty exciting. And thank you to Thom for joining with me in this. It's been really nice, some of the conversations we've had in preparation for this. And thanks to everyone. And so I'm going to start. I've got a few poems to read here. I'm going to start with one from my book, Interrogation Days. Focuses on the genocide in Gaza. It's called From the Imperial Core, and it has a few different voices. It includes a lot of quotations, and so it's kind of a patchwork of voices. So it's particularly focused on the months from October to December in 2023, very early period. And I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I'm going to read about 3 sections. So from the Imperial Core, for the martyrs. In October, George W. Bush throws the first pitch at the World Series. 2001 again in Parallax. The president says this is not 9/11. It is equivalent to 15. He says this without shame. On screen, U.S. senators speak of terrorism, the right to defend, saccharine genocidal memes, sociopathic hand on heart. If Israel did not exist, said Biden, the United States would have to invent it. Military contracts wadded up and shoved into a chest cavity. Scarecrow viscera, blood like sand and gravel. A vengeful and cruel IDF is needed here. Anything less is immoral. The CEO of Raytheon is George J. Hayes. In Matcal Tower, rocket coordinates spill from the monitors. Somewhere, the children sleep and dream. Every accusation is in the mirror. First slaughter, then vomit, the veil of lies. We cannot confirm it officially, but you can assume it happened. See a baby bottle, a calendar, a curtain pinned up against the wall. Language just a bruise in the air, a cardboard cutout trampled in the alley. Using AI, Israel accelerates target production. They call it the gospel. They call it civil pressure when bombing a hospital, a school, a residential high-rise. Our eyes become an archive, a lattice laid across what, beneath what. The most moral military in the world annihilates anyone and then says anything they want. The CEO of Boeing is Kelly Ortberg. For the martyrs, rocks and stones hold memories, bearing witness among the grasses, cradling footprints, vanished ribbons. We'll be back, the dead boys say, smiling in another life. The humanitarian pause arrives for Thanksgiving. On Black Friday, they've lined up for discounts, savings, prices slashed. Nothing survives the American mind. At 17,000 Palestinians killed, an undercount, Matthew Miller says, too early to assess, as in, the clock is endless, the dial broken. Last summer, Americans watched Oppenheimer on IMAX, dreaming death as the ultimate product. Ribbons, footprints, blood like sand. The CEO of General Dynamics is Phoebe Novakovic. In Massacre Yada, as the drone speaks, it hovers over parent and child. If anyone thinks to do anything, we will find them and we will kill them. Voice of vomit, lead, asphyxiation. We are working tirelessly. Beneath the stars, the sky, a single stone. And then another life. Okay, this next poem is called Taking It Down. To write, you must be still. You must listen to your own head talk. Other voices hide in there. The hiding is a kind of job. Carry the remains out in a bag. This morning, yesterday, tomorrow, carry them as an act of love. A cop writes on your heart, flesh like paper, like styrofoam. They scratch the words in with a fork. To write, you must arrest yourself. This is the meaning of technique. An act of love, a paper heart. Police are keeping track. Theirs is the wrong eternity. Now listen to your head. Return all personal effects. Each sentence eats the stillness. Return what was a person once. This is a police technique. The words break off. The room surrounds you like a mask. Each one is another world. The mind, a strangled telephone. The room is telling you the task. These gloves, this car. Each word tends a patient. You may remove your face. Each word tracks a person. Each sentence kills the last. Now ask me what my name becomes. Now tell me in my tongue. The afternoon is oozing files. To write it is an old technique. This arrest becomes my world. Its catastrophe is my report. Okay, so I'm about to release a book called Travis. I've had some sections come out online, one with Tom's Press, Blue Bag, their resources, also in Protean and Prolit a few years ago. But this is a sequence of poems that is based around the movie Taxi Driver, actually. Takes the figure of Travis Bickle, that's the Travis in question, and um, uses that kind of as a basic framework um, to explore violence in America, specifically things around alienation, um, psychological breakdown, mass shooting. Um, and as with some of the earlier poems, or with the poems about Gaza, this also uses quotations. There's some stuff from the film. There's also just like multiple voices happening. Um, and I'm going to read several of these, and then there'll be one more after that. So these are all, yeah, from Travis. A nation surrounds itself with what it sells. an environment, a cortex, whale oil, fossil fuel, petrochemical plastic dolls. See psyche as a pretext for exchanges. See axon dendrite interface, automated tellers. Travis moves through a war hallucination pretending to be a city. Budweiser, Ford, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Elsewhere, 4 Xanax, 3 chat rooms, an incel's grin. There is nothing scarier than crawling into James Holmes's mind and wearing his face. The city is an eye looking back at itself. NBC, IMF, the fall of Saigon. I don't care. Don't make no difference to me. Becoming no one, anyone, becoming you. Vagus nerve, mitral valve, alchemy. I mean, we're all fucked, more or less, you know. A trachea, a document cache, shredded cables plugged into the black box, to scatter, to grieve. Strapped in, we enter anywhere, a fantasy inside the nightmare, a frenzy in the whale's guts. Travis moves through swarms of trolls, thinks he might be a cop, an outlaw, a star. He might be writing a book, a pissant, a passerby, a bloodstream a camera floats within. It's in the air here, in the news. It doesn't matter what the real world is. A sidewalk in cold sunlight, a silent man passing you in the hall, his hands hidden, face a blank. The candidate is alive. You can reach out and shake his hand, to stumble, to alert. At night, Travis becomes an engine block, a closed circuit TV. Elsewhere, Bretton Woods, Coca-Cola, rated X. One should be a person like other people. The candidate's face in the rear view, listening. Speed freak, rapist, executive. My real dream was to be the Shah. See a man wrapped in newspapers, asleep on the steps. Weather vane, laborer, John. Travis carries the future through the city. He combusts beneath an exoskeleton, a coffin of metal and glass, under the sign of the scorpion, of the empire, employed. Place behind the navel where a gear stalls. Something burns. Dexedrine, a bump stock, the minimal heart. Elsewhere, a traumatized lamb consoles itself, nuzzling a stuffed toy pig to gather to attune. Elsewhere, an incel shits his pants to amuse the chat, then he takes his own life. Oxytocin, humiliation, the heart as a window becoming light. I fear I will never know myself again. Travis cradles the telephone, his voice nullified. A memory of her, his chest heaving, face of ash, said, now my dream wanders the withered fields. Said, this is the end of our broadcast day. Stepping down the hall, stepping through it. And after that, the night. An eye turns on as imagination dies. Commodity is a relation between things that conceals what forms it. Said, what do you see when it looks back at you? Said, no one remembers shit. Memes of little St. James, damaged prosthesis, a boy's dream of petting a calico, to wonder, to flee. Here, a pedophile pimp throws a 20 on the passenger seat. Do you know the kinds of things he said to me about you? Depending on accident, on error, a radio seeping ads from the dash. In this case, the reek of dead flowers, their sex rotting in a sink. In this, My whole life has pointed in one direction. I see that now. Eyes wide, the crumpled 20. Iris. About 3 of these left. Travis reclines in his seat, watches us through parted fingers, and then suddenly there's change. The harp's music sweetens with slaughter, with strife, hydrocodone, naloxone. That's our tightened fist held above the flame. Our feed surgery on the reel. Elsewhere, hush money, Cialis, the cutting room floor. The drone misses the target. The browser crashes. Sick, venal. Said, porno is the mode of dying empire. An Uber driver dressed like the Joker. Said, flush it right down the fucking toilet. The suspect stated, it felt just like a movie. Said, in some funny way, the only sane thing to do. Travis takes a razor to his head, enters a riddle, a hotel, a suitcase full of weapons. Having done this thing, what am I? In this case, a paratrooper over Laos. In this, Adderall, Salvation Army, a Nazi rally in Michigan. Choking, coughing down the hallway, screams. Here, one stays up for 8 days. One bets it all. Asphyxiation, patience, an extended clip. Only myself matters, and I don't even exist. See a series of cameras, mirrors, unsent letters. See a room in a desert casino, a view of the festival, ants tracking pheromones in spectral circuits on the ground. Said, take it from me, take it. One last look. Americans. And this is the last one in the Travis sequence that I'm reading. It's not the end of the book. An era at the end of a hole. Said, got up and it was morning all night long. Said, all the king's men cannot put it back together again. Leatherface on ketamine, slashing the air. Eat the rich, sprayed on a Cybertruck. What if the lone wolf is the means of production? To settle, to sow. Elsewhere, John Wayne's corpse stuffed with celluloid and shit. Manifest destiny, wellness check, pens in the base of the spine. Said, the idea had been growing in me for some time. Said, these parasites had it coming. Travis's hand, the nation's hand, the dry click of the firing pin. Again, again. Trapped in a mirror, his zombie smile. The future in a pool on the tile. Okay, this last one I'm going to read is sort of a coda to my book, Parking Lot Horizon. When I published it, I listed it as an appendix. That makes it seem a little bit more like ancillary, I guess. Regardless, it is the coda to my book, Parking Lot Horizon. There's no title. Psyche is a commune, the living share with the dead. Inside the heart, dripping in the head, the edges bleeding mercury, dopamine, a radio whose alien wavelengths break through, bruised with futures, trailing a music vacant enough for any zodiac, any pharmacy, a sea. The glitches are no accident, each mark revealing where we are, trash stratum, ghost channel, a codex pressed into a sheet metal boundary, its rust glyph tapping your liver, exploding as it begins, a delinquent account, your crazed, echoing skin. Life's form cracks, and deaths become gentle as children, tracing dream life into matter, teaching psyche, its endless archive, its book patched from images, Ophelia, chloral hydrate, Marx and Engels, Neptune caught in the sky, planet of poetry and music, communes, of poisons, curing our eyes of time. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, for that incredible reading. And having spent so much time with your work over the last couple of years, it's really a treat to hear you read all of these out loud. So thank you. Now my dream wanders the withered fields. It's beautiful. All right, I'll introduce our second reader. Thom Eichelberger-Young is a text artist, former mental health caregiver, publisher, editor, soon to be divorcee, and PhD student living in Buffalo, New York, where they do most of these things to make ends meet, but really to fund their press, Blue Bag Press, which they started and continue to edit. Thom's recent books include Antikythera, poems out from Antiphony Press, and Ointment Weather, Insurgent Poetics for Desperate Times, essays out from Cloak. A follow-up poetic sequence, Days, will appear this fall. Their poems and essays have otherwise appeared widely or are forthcoming in such venues as Brink, Fence, Bombay Gin, Mantis, Noir Sauna, Mercury Furs, Transat, Data Bleed, and No Placebos. Welcome, Thom. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, so much for organizing this, and Matt for the wonderful reading and material and what's forthcoming that we'll talk about. I'm gonna, I guess, work in chronological order through Crisis this evening in this reading, starting with a panel from Antikythera, and then moving over into some of the material that is in this digital booklet that we put together for the reading from Days, and then end with the newly revised essay Domains Numerica, which is sort of like an outtake piece from Ointment Weather. But to start, it's this untitled panel, which was written when around spring of 2024, when Israel and Iran were exchanging missile strikes against each other at that point in time. And so just thinking about some of the prescience continuity that is happening here. Lesson of the launches, War College. How much does it cost? 5 million. Counter-strike, Force, DIO, Arash 2, hours from arrival. Lesson from Promise 2, counter-strike any territory that allows the Israeli Air Force to intercept. This attack lesson, how to plan an attack, which is difficult or impossible to intercept. Lesson, how to create a bad dream. Watching the news now is alt-deaf, waiting for the tallies and score. In another location, some people text friends and relatives to query their level of interest in coming events, and if due, they want to come out for a cocktail. In another place, someone knows it is time that they start making dinner, and that they are the only one who will. Many things then are transmitted via space, the air above us, and further on. So the next poem is more recent. I think the thematic here is fairly obvious. The language and form that my recent project Days has taken on has been, to me, a synthesis of the approach I had taken in the panels and the concept and advancement of some of that style and voice in Ointment Weather, which is essays, but done in, I guess hybrid is an easy word to use, fashion. So I'll read a couple of these. The first one is going to be One Day, Enraged and Didactic. The following occurs amidst a blast cloud engulfing a flying bird who loses GPS capacity and instead spirals around until the dust clears and they exit the frame. Down there is all you can call it. for you, infected, pus on your fingers. Now it's honey and then not, still, always tasted, out of a bite or some kind of wonderful. Fingers to the lips, catching paint and caress teeth, gently bite them. And the nails come out clean. Forget the smell, forget the tactic, then back to the wounds, ooze as an erotic vacuum. There's a letter on the table. At the point of release, they begin chanting again. They had not stopped. Multiple groups face trial as groups for direct action. Others relate diversity of tactics. The BBC tries to manufacture a new crystal knot while a mother slowly dies. Government performance receives rave reviews from Tony and Alexandra, who've seen each show. Gusto at the addition of a new scene in which legislators discuss an embargo. No one like mine. Violent constellation met in the night as the craft slips smoothly towards the proving grounds. I see a rain of blood. One commenter posts a picture at the port of Calais while thermal imaging tracks their white outline through the gate. 1. Is this product subject to national export controls? Outside of the United States, yes or no? 2. If yes, indicate country of jurisdiction and classification number, yes or no? 3. If yes, is this military product or does the product use military technology? Dear L, you gave me 2 months. Only a few people can be trusted with this. Apparitions within the climate. So climatology is synonymous to ideology in that structure. Drunk nights, I get in another person's bed while they are gone. Noises rise with the temperature and air. Talk to the driver of the bus as she switches sides. Charts track a rhythmic down and up such that it's patterned. Well, we did smash glass, but also destroyed the political idols. There are so many in museums, so often close to the bells, I mean down the avenue, and you can see it. This fall, we will pitch tents. Tomorrow, she may die in the tunnel to heaven, filled with unending lights, reclamation of pamphlets, return of him to street situation, the neighborhood with the loud cars, down the street to the manse, we're covering our heads during dinner in the garden, came out bluffing, came out fucking, with a gun for your cousin. This next one is just called One Day. Prescience, happenstance, and consequence, such that is leading into the arms of another. What I found in his drawers, coming after lines to the effect of read into, forgot somatic, and into cloth red soaked. So it is juxtaposition, many things within. 2 scenes, digitally voiced album tones, and removed later from the catalog. What if this one doesn't happen at the right speed? The past few days, things have quieted down outside, or other than the night boats in the city. Propaganda reel of a Chinese flight of aid, which is actually a military plane 2 years ago. Intersplice, reel to reel. Made medium of it. Phosphorus. Protocol 3 amounts to less than 2 pages delineating the legal parameters for incendiary weapon use. Technically not banned. So go. Ape shit to windshield. They'll slaughter you no matter your barrier. Downbeat and lane with prodding lioness and saber to betweenness of her teeth and reminds of a gone flag. Situation clarifies to become boulevard, all elegance embedded as unseen, disappeared such. Exit prison, RICO charge, stunted, solitary inducement, heat from the systemic kettling. Under the overpass, what forms a tunnel, days of wine, watching, what is called drinking, streaming, incessant satire in textbook and dictation. Which flag, which, to say what patriotism and function as occurs after, having to make each neighborhood walkable, burnt car, shell navigable, you can play pretend, flight simulator from appropriate robbery, looting is a toxic term, games which prepared us for these streets. And then this one is the last from this days that I'll read, and then I'll go over to the next piece. And it's just called again One Day. Each of the pieces is titled with the amount of days it took to compose, and some have like a appended subtitle as the first one did, and some of them are dedicated to people who being channeled mediumistic type writing through ontological dynamics that we're living within. This particular piece was working with material from Electronic Intifada that day, and also thinking about some Microsoft employees who had been fired or forced to resign because of their activism for Palestine during shareholder meetings that were taking place. And so it's dedicated to two of them, Vanya Agarwal and Ibtihal Abu Saad. This one to begin with, Break Break Circuit, or Snap Crackle Pop. This one being born from just raw sound or anger, standing in the shower as the sun rises. This one, braids in action with reports from the Intifada and dominated. This one begins, dive into sewage to find the octopus while the chariots ride. Obligation brought us here as another body prowls their property line. Evade massive shrapnel and hovering quadcopter. These appear in many poems, including Jeffrey's. Some say one arrived along the sun's line. The day the wall breaks, just making all this happiness after the conversation. Now standing, thank you for your protest. I hear you. Posterior to duplication dreams, never ended, only accelerated. Chemotherapy in Amman, ring stains in the bowl, vomit, labeled as a moment of joy amidst equate simple equals not participant in power equals theremin whistle of the teapot, but it's a bus. You imagine the craft descends onto the center of the four-way crossing, cluster fucking the school bus routes. Got to get ready for the multi-generational factory shift. Ass ridden, solace from the residual crust in your mustache swells. This compound will burn your skin. We collected her intestines from the trees. I share your faith that we will see Palestine liberated, and all this horror and suffering will have been for permanently disabled society, living outside. You should try and do something, incite action, and burn down the public houses, stab soldiers, ICE agents, and cops, invent something. Well, then this suggests deconstructing your use of the words free man as a means to destabilize your argument and deny the whole global complicity in your indictment. We can do more. Collapse aesthetics. Urgency sounds trite, and still, we needed to hear it with such eloquence. And his father turned 60, looking for water in the mud, while another died without final answer to the Nakba. So this next and final piece, I'm just going to read a number of sections from, and it will be a little long. Domain Zumerica began in Kansas City in the April of last year as part of a sequence of site visits that I was doing at the time, where I would go and sit at a museum or another public site, like a park or zoo, and really observe the way people were interacting with all aspects of the institution and the public space, the design of the building. And I ended up revising this piece intentionally for this event, thinking through concerns about the nature of possibility for revolution in the United States and what the left coalition that is occurring, things like this 50-51 movement and the neoliberal and imperially adjacent stances a lot of this coalition is still manifesting and still embodying. So I ended up revising it heavily, and I'm just going to read through the opening sections here. Domain Zumerica. Sequence, observation, methodologist, moving it, homing from further away, launched from the greatest distance yet observed, coordinating conjunction. Do you mean tomorrow? Train klaxon, which is Lynn Doyle's Doppler effect, heraldic to the chronology of editing, then the book, and now the chapbook, divides released, unreleased, sequenced, with music, first time, long time, and so forth. Collar, sequence, with the inverse book ban from the left, reasonably, against the cisgender writer who wrote a humorous book about the penis removed during gender-affirming surgery, the penis being the main character, the patient regretful and detransitioning, questions emerge about the actuality or intention of this narrative in tandem with critiques over subject's offense, because the genre is radical and disruptive. That's institution pragmatics, and effectively rejected or rebuked, all breeding the collapse scenario against which happens, in part, our insurgency. Drama and necessary conversation, theatrics hand in hand, their relationality to truth, facticity. My current problem with the personal in this dynamic, such as ontic, is about the situation of my work. Where went the political and the war? Where did my body go? Transforming interest over to mere observation. Why specular? And why make spectacles that are pages? Some nights transpose the corporeal into distress, which renders itself as panic and panting, then shallow and near no breathing. Now on the ground, I observe the interaction between human and non-human species. Clinical phraseology and the trumpeter swan. To marry, train, cruel analogy to dominionate the animal. The way they move forward and locate you, knowing you're there, but they do not conspire. With held breath, someone is running behind. The auditory landscape is not joyful, but riddled with domestic disputes over custody and an unfolding divorce. That is scaled outwards as another drama within the dynamic of perception. Given the absenting of participation within this scenario, though now, revising cannot say the same about scenaric absence. Given, too, ours is a production eminent from the house, moving towards filth. We seek to leave. Yesterday, a vertical crack split one wall from another. Plumbers offer assessments based on the orientation of such faults. An otter is not a fish, no matter how much you declare it to be so, your small hands dragging along the glass. It is another nightmare into an aquacultural setting. The way water sluices in parks, a wastewater feature. Riddle of me this. White bear on green grass. Audience says, that is so sad. In the 10 times the children are crying, where is that supposed to go? Take the first 3 letters as the braid, say toa, 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 and disregard the origination. It is all only names, but words are spells. Here is where I declared my aspect of labor, space bisected by a hymnopteric line of bodies. I can sit and watch observers from here, such as respective commentary, thus to offer the descriptor practice. Here is durational perceiving of spaces, alt-def, site visit. In the next cell, this orangutan has ripped banners from the walls and fashioned them into a shawl. The fantasy of the messenger, disregarded apropos naivete and violence of the messenger and their motions. In a or the situation, escape velocity, desperation, and panic pervade the neural network as commandants of behavior and procedure. The institution eradicates the ability to critically assess the denigration, facet of the dreaded comparison, apparent before any subject's perception, denying subjectivity. The argument is consequently posited that this sort of space requires critical assessment for effective navigation. A looking against the presentation, alt-def surface, objects and cages deprived of agency with regard to freedom of movement, in order to sense the mechanics of its operation. This is not done save typically towards the already capably described category, charismatic megafauna. Such a looking, alt-def seeing could be, witnessing could be, has been exculturated from our society, who have accepted these venues as pleasure parks. Notes to be added. The inclusion of humans, then perceived as non-human animals, in same venues in prior generations. We are already keenly aware of the easy observations, and so then suggest instead reading all signage around cages of elephants, pandas, giraffes, as well as rhinoceroses. Is the institution claiming to preserve and protect these species? In some situations, the institution weaponizes their funding in order to continue the pleasure park mentality to sedate its participants through the seductive presentation of menagerie. Bearing the lures of fantasy and knowledge, this engagement is archaic. This situation is depressing. The efforts of other funding and organizational bodies are disappeared and ignored. Editor's note, is this about parks or small press versus micro press publishing efforts? The same mentality of institutional distortion occurs when narratives of longevity within captivity are presented, both in defiance at times of fact, as well as in blatant disregard to the reality of there can be such a natural order, which is not designed after and upon anthropocentric values. In every situation, institutions, here bluntly articulated to be shored up, monetized state containment vehicles, command the arms of moral and rational education, often federally, so that they enculturate their intended, oft fascistic, racist, and cognitively stunted moral drives and sensations, which act as stated in the deprivation of beings, otherwise freely obtained subjectivities, granted to us from far beyond the anthropoid. A conscious state nullification of the paradoxical gift of being and an enactment of said subject's capacity to be objects of momentum, affirmation, and commodification as labor for the state under guise of institution. In this zoo, each cell is accompanied by a placard stating what is being done. The question mark is incredibly effective, double edge or exposure. What is not being done? What is the effect, rather, of prolonged screaming by children? Where? Ripping through the atmosphere, distressing and settling conversations into anticipation or apathetic chill. Are these not then observed by the non-humans within an expansion of this calamity? Forcing a populace to hear and receive the blunt force traumatic impact 24/7 of another system's curated and produced array of sounds and the destructions they advance signal. In what many here would call an actual prison, these sounds still occur, often in the form of abuse and dangerous rhetorics from COs. Recently, thanks to my friend, alt-def co-conspirator Alex Tretbach, I joined a mutual network, Empowerment Avenue, in solidarity with incarcerated individuals being harassed by COs and otherwise, because public citizens have to pressure prison and state authorities to indicate they're witnessing the rampant abuses behind the gates. Else, it would just continue. We contact the prison and media outlets over the phone and by email indicating, we see you, we see what you are doing, in a sight born out of our critical awarenesses. There is no effective grievance or oversight protocol in place within the United States' increasingly privatized prison system. If prisons are to be maintained as necessary evil of the current status quo, they should be federally operated, as ICE facilities are supposedly operated with the capacity for elected officials to bear oversight authority over them, that enables them to physically visit the property as these officials please in order to ensure prisons' adherence to an already despicable legal framework. There is so much we have to change. I wonder if the portrait can more often go unnamed because of typically referential facts within it. They make it obvious. Hear a horn, a beep, away the world changes. Whatever there was attempted metaphor surrounding protein folds and misprision of prions to delude the or a mind. I am disparaging myself for being trapped and then falling outside the box of the matrix, running up inside me as bars and rails lateral and perpendicularized. I am frustrated by power loss along the neural line. That ontological network is often retaliatory and frustrating, predations upon it emerging out of the intense assimilated desires that you now realize are state programming. You are the candidate. 2 questions and a statement run 3 lines across a fence, banners. What is happening? What is being done? How can you help? I tell you, they are sleeping. If they were outside, they would be sleeping. They do not do much. You seem offended. Masses move by to ignore gestures and create a momentum. The subject becomes object, incapable of stopping, object to their objects. Now that's homeostasis, as preferred quotidian paradigm across the polis. Another note about paradoxical systems. In Kansas City, the state has implemented multiple forms of hyper-localized pseudo-public transit, all at high cost and to great delight and amusement, strictly as novelty. What would happen if I were there? Where? To your imagination. Synchronous neck movement tracks dinosaur. The commando instructs, help us, help them. Dominion, synonym of, is the formatting of the space as exhibits along the lines of any gallery in a museum. As I have noted, all named cages, they move the species into commodification by rendering them aesthetic objects. They can be affirmed as such within the sense of production by the anthropocentric woe that is dominion. The reality would be that the coral is bleached, or that the toilet is a bucket in the corner and the disregard of an authority and their voice continuing on and on forward, or that our government lies their ass off while coordinating an attack with Israel that perpetuates, say, cheese. The utility company rate hike funded this wing of the gallery, while we made budget cuts to the 134% rate increase. My parents had aesthetic barometers, which were not sensate but climatological. The suspicions over gallerization are confirmed by whispers of the specimen's beauty and location. But the coral isn't bleached, so it's a lie or false image, that is, artifice. I am only watching gills pumping, jettison off back feathers and trajectory as bubbles and fleet motions across the tank. That is equivalent to a stream or contrail. What if the feature type is Saturnine? No mention of the musical score to the symptom. The institution parades its objects, alt-def subjects, before the fostered object audience while they all scream in different directions. I do not like gold stickers with black veins. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, so much for that reading. I'm always struck by these lines you have that feel like hammer falls. You know, while another father died without an answer to the Nakba, I am frustrated by power loss along the neural line. It's really, really gorgeous. Okay, so I'll kick off our discussion. I want to start out with a bit about how I came to this idea of a talk between these two artists. I've personally come to a reckoning with my own art and poetry as I perceive my world to be increasingly under crisis. I discovered and read Interrogation Days by Matt, his Substack Out of Its Wooden Brain, and later the essays and works of Thom, especially Ointment Weather and their newer Ongoing Days project that we just heard from. From these works, I felt a new urgency and determination in my own perception of what my poetry could be. Increasingly, I find it impossible to write anything that isn't infused with an awareness of my current context and the many injustices in the world around me. I view the times we're in as a polycrisis. The intersection of climate change, oligarchy, and state violence is obvious. In these pieces we just heard, as well as the books they're pulled from, you'll notice these poems use a similar modality: psychic fragments for Matt and whole cognition for Thom. These forms are able to communicate a more complete picture through this fragmentation. They mimic the functioning of our actual minds in action, a swirling mess of ideas, images, and emotions communicated through a frenzy of social media posts, the news, and our own internal and external observations. Psyche plays an important role in the works of both these poets. Through their work, I've come to an awakening in my own poetry, an ability to better articulate my own sense of fragmentation, of nightmare, and of humanity. In putting these two in conversation, my hope is for all of us to come away with an inspiration for a new type of praxis, a way of approaching these subjects to feel so big as to be eclipsing. I want more poetry to reflect an awareness of crisis. All art should be involved in resistance. This is the time for boldness in voice, in practice, and in our hearts. With that, I'll get us started. Thom, Matt, I want to thank you again for your beautiful reading tonight. I'll start with Thom. I'm especially interested in your use of both fragmentation and dictation to communicate a more complete mapping of your personal experience living through crisis. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to this modality you're currently practicing in, especially as it relates to these New Days poems?
Yeah. I'm thinking through 11 years of, practice or whatever. And early on writing in the mid 2010s, I realized pretty quickly that I was not interested in talking about manufacturing content and experience that felt to me alien in some way because it was not my own. And I feel like my work up until probably 2020 was pretty self-centered in many ways in producing that. And I feel like at the same time that work was often produced within a paradigm of heavy construction and what I use this word artifice or artificiality. there are people that are talented or have skills at things, and it's obvious that they're capable of reproducing what a mainstream group of people would perceive as an artwork or aesthetic object, and it impacts them in many ways in the same way, shape, or form. But the questionable nature of the authenticity of that production emerged over time, and have some fascination with Jack Spicer's dictation that took place, from out of the Vancouver lectures, where he describes this poet as radio and the messages from the Martians. And when reading that, was really stricken by, wow, this is how I felt a lot of my work has come upon me, very compulsed or impulsed out of something beyond me. And I became fascinated by this, and a little put off by the lack of follow-up by somebody like Spicer to really go into where the hell this might be coming from or coming out of, and wound up tracking that for a long time through a lot of work by a variety of poets, between interviews, essays, poems themselves. A lot of those poets were starting within the language poetry movement and the ancillary people around there, and moving forward. I especially remember ways in which certain poets seem to naturalize into our world and the grounding world around us, where this mediumistic impulse comes from. Like Lynn Huginian often associates something similar to this with rain, and Susan Howe is really disoriented with the alien, supernatural, fantasy kind of way in which Spicer described it, and also felt similarly that it came out of, for her, somewhat that New England environment, but the woods, the rivers. And when I started the panels, this just like whole thing happened where it was a wash onto me. It was this way. It's hard to explain, but it happened. I wanted to write a book about an ex and go through all of our text messages and old things, what the hell? And it just wound up being this other way. And over time, the panels moved from what is more of like an autobiographical experience with my then spouse, who deals with pretty intensive medical issues and disability, navigating at the very first 15 panels, a lot of this long heat dome, which feels like it's repeating right now. And they moved in time into deeper awareness and intimacy with this crisis that we're talking about, the matrix of them that is really crisis in so many ways, rooted back to a chain of forces that are constantly working together. And that, over time took over. And so that's some of the trajectory, but inevitably I point out that I feel this type of form as sometimes unapproachable as some people might feel, or as different from lineated biography, seems to be more authentic, because you're getting a glimpse at what I'm fascinated by, is a sort of cognitive mapping. I've always been wanting to capture as best as I can the interior monologue in my head. That too was something that when I started writing poems, 11 or 12 years ago, I was wanting to have done. And eventually, with time and experience, it was able to come to this point. But most all the work that I do is that heard language. And Days really resembles the very intense, non-spiritual approach that I articulate in Ointment Weather as to explain this for Poetics. And I will kind of vaguely stop there to say that it's what I theorize as being ontological pure speech. And to say that has, I think that's going to come up later too. So that's probably a good place to stop there.
And just to throw it out there to plug your other book, Antikythera. If anybody wants to take a look at what these panels look like, this panel work that Thom is talking about, that's a good place to start. That's a really good example of these panels that Thom is referring to. Okay, Matt, one of the many things I appreciate in your essays from your Substack Out of Its Wooden Brain is your writing on psyche under capitalism. As our artistic output has become commodified for consumption, how does this interfere with imagination?
Thanks, Rachel. And I think, yeah, I can't remember if I thanked you at the beginning. I was like disoriented when I started my reading.
You
If I
totally
did,
did. You totally did.
well, thank you again. Um, yeah, I write a lot about psyche, and this is one of those words that is very nebulous, I think, to a lot of people. We all use it, but it's kind of vague and switches meanings. I base a lot of my understanding of this term in the work of James Hillman, who's a sort of a post-Jungian uh, psychologist. He's a very fascinating writer, but in talking about psyche, I'm basically talking about imagination and talking about the fact that imagination is really something that helps structure our reality, that our experience of reality is always um, filtered through, our desires, uh, our need for meaning, our projections of possibility, um, a sense of how we deal with our own suffering, with the possibility, with the inevitability of death. And so imagination for me is not really about like creativity. It's not something that only artists do. Like imagination is actually fundamental to how we inhabit and project a sense of our world, a sense of and that our world is essentially an experience of sort of interwoven imagination and reality. And so um, in talking about this, we say like, okay, artists then intensify our experience of psyche or intensify our experiences of imagination, and that this is really the the space where art works. Capitalism also goes to work on our imagination. Fundamentally, it is a sort of like a counter imagination. The commodity form itself conceals the reality of the labor that produced it. The fundamental sort of structuring aspect of life under capitalism is based on a concealment of reality. We then naturalize this through ideology, sort of in the Marxian sense of, the legitimating narratives and values and stories that we tell about how life under capitalism is great and all of these things. And so, in this sense, artists are fighting capitalism fundamentally. They're both contesting imagination. I once saw a talk with the poet Bridget Pegeen Kelly, and she referred to capitalism as a vision. She said, there's never been a vision in history like this. We've never had a vision like this that was so all-consuming and could swallow everything up in it. And I think that that's the way to think about it. And that art is fundamentally engaged in trying to resist this, to fight back against it, to fight back against the enclosure of the psyche within this bullshit image of the world that capital gives us. I'm also very fond of the Diane de Prima quote about the only war that matters is the war against imagination. All of the other wars are subsumed in them. And it's not to say that imagination is somehow more important to be concerned about than literal warfare in Iran and these things. It's that those two, bombing Iran is also an assault upon imagination. It is an assault upon people's ability to envision the world, to envision a future, to actually project themselves into reality with a sense of possibility and freedom, rather than being closed down in the horror show of violence. And so this is like a fundamental thing for me in understanding art, is that you have to position yourself as someone who is for imagination against capital. That capital will go to work with its own powers of poesis and its own powers of world creation, and it'll stir up its own fantasies and pathologies and do all of these sort of poetic activities within a society. And it, in a way, it is like, that quote about the poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. It's like the legislators of the world use their own poetry. Like they are engaging our senses of fantasy and desire. I mean, everyone's love of Trump is a fantasy. They're projecting these complete lies that they need to have a sense of meaning in their lives, to have a sense that the world makes sense. They're dreaming. And so artists go to work in that dream life and in some way have to take that seriously, take the political life of imagination seriously, to understand that it's about a hell of a lot more than just a nicely composed poem and whether or not you want an award or something, but it really is about how do I exist in the world, in reality, under the conditions that we're given, and how do my dreams not die there? Because everything going on wants to shut your dreams down, wants to shut down your sense of reality and possibility and all of this, and just make you buy into the literal, the sort of fake realism of just being a consumer and a worker.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Thom, one thing I admire about both your own work and your publishing practice is your sense of urgency and ethical discourse. In Ointment Weather, you write critically about poetry that separates itself from political and ethical discourse and a sequence of aesthetic and political action. You prescribe silence as a way of opening your mind to await or listen for the hearing of being. Can poetry ever be separated from the context of the reality under which it was created? How can silence function as a catalyst?
You know, there are two dominating answers to the question of can poetry ever be separated from, a political reality, for instance. And it's been my experience of late, amidst the issues that we are dealing with caused by America and the United Kingdom and other Western cultures and states, upon subaltern communities and upon a variety of communities within our borders, if we can claim that those exist, or if we should just deny them. Many people, many that I deeply care about and am close friends with, feel that poetry and art will not effectuate change. But there's, this is to me a fairly American condition in so many ways, because you look at societies that go through liberation movements, and it really doesn't matter too much what that society is, where it's located. And poetry is a pivotal part of these movements to incite action. And it is part of a landscape, even at times a propagandized landscape of constant noise production within these landscapes, in Islamic jihadist communities. Doesn't matter your gender, many poets across the ranks, the militant ranks, and many poetry publications, and they simply are not necessarily explicitly writing about a lot of the topics that are being written about in the United States. I hesitate to topic right now because I don't want anyone to necessarily pull that out and take issue with it. But maybe more broadly, for instance, romance, love poetry. And where is its place in a society who have been doing in general? I can include myself in this. Doing very, very little to mass revolt against the imperialist machine. and then go out to a party, go out and drink, go out and spend your time doing this, because there is this mentality that the revolution is part of the time, et cetera. And there is especially a mentality that we shouldn't have to suffer through any of this stuff, despite the fact that across the board, every person victimized by America is suffering. And we can't take on just a modicum of this for a brief period in time in order to revolt and tear down the state. So I do not believe that it can be separated, because it does, like, it has to be carefully treated, right? And Ointment Weather bifurcates in its description of this in some ways. And what ended up happening in that text, though, is it worked through a sequence of critiques of living dead, left, so-called left poets, if we can even call some of them that, poets historically identified with the avant-garde left and their complicities and institutional and state alignments. I worked through expositions of the imperialist machine across the board, thinking about Matt's mention, capitalism is a big aspect there, and what I describe about state enculturation and exculturation of what they want to program into you, and then they want to take out of you your capacity for pure speech. Capital is a big driver of this. And ended with, this discussion again of what is aesthetics, et cetera. But even further, it does end with that call for silence, to say that if you're not hearing this type of language, there is a lot of work that I don't describe in Ointment Weather that I would talk about at length now and have been doing, that we have to do to extricate our subjectivities and conscious cognition from the state and from everything we've been exposed to. We, as the book says, I was brainwashed as a child. There's so much there that I would love there to be this terrain in which everybody can write whatever is impulsed upon us, for sure. But right now, there needs to be some sort of transitional period where and we're capable people, a lot of us. Many of us are educated, theorized, have backgrounds in a lot of research into material history that can be used to incite and to educate and disseminate this type of information to people around us. And it's like, whatever was going on, think about the Vietnam War movement and the amount of poets, again, like people like Ron Silliman, who were so active then, and the amount of journals talking about all of this stuff. And that's not to say this work isn't being done, but there's certainly a massive, massive wall of silence in this group of people who think it is okay to continue to put their career first, their words first. And I mean that seriously. Like, fuck your academic job, fuck your money, royalties from your book of poetry. There are many, many other jobs that I fucking worked in order to make ends meet. And you can probably find one, but there has to be some really pragmatic rationalization of what's going on. And I don't think, I am heartened by a lot of just speaking about, the imperialist machine, state violence in the way that it's been happening in the past, especially the past few weeks. The amount of people that are speaking out and saying things often for the first time in a public way, even if it's just on social media. But it's certainly not enough, and it's not enough to stop what's happening now. And so those are some of my thoughts to that end.
I'd like to jump on a part of that, if that's okay. This idea of putting one's career first, and the way in which poetry as a career, and the way that ties in with the academy, and the way that this can become something that ends up silencing somebody, or they are making their own, they're not saying things, they're not using that platform or whatever. I mean, my position and my way of thinking about it is that, even though it's an old kind of corny phrase to an extent from the 60s, the idea of being an anti-establishment or even just counterculture artist or thinker, it seems to be something worth reviving a bit here. Because I look at it as like, I've done everything I can with my publishing and my writing to just drop out of these things so that I will never have to make a decision based on that type of, departmental politics or something like this about, what is this person who has power over my career going to say or whatever. It's just like, I think that that is something that is exciting to me to see a lot of. I feel like I'm recognizing a lot more, uh, especially younger writers who are interested in occupying a more sort of radical or countercultural position with their writing so that, you know, um, you aren't entangled in all of these professionalized aspects of literary culture, because that professionalism, which extends various supposed benefits in the forms of grants and fellowships and recognition and prestige, and these things also have a way of disciplining you. And of course, we all have to pay the bills, right? I mean, we're not free to just like do whatever we want because we think it's the ethically superior thing. We're all compromised to an extent by capitalism. But the way in which a young person entering the poetry world typically sees like, oh, contests, awards, I want to win. I want this degree. And they are very easily sort of nudged into what is fundamentally a careerist path. Um, and the more people who say like, no, we need to draw a line against this sort of careerism and actually define what this careerism is about and why we would want out of it, and to sort of recognize one another who are out of it, who have dropped out, so to speak, to an extent, to sort of support one another and sort of, just kind of clarify what our position is. Because I feel like having a sense of one's position these the establishment is a meaningful thing.
Yeah, I want to just tack on to be very clear. If anybody wants to take away the "fuck your job" comment, very aligned with that is directly applied towards a very limited grouping of people. With sensitivity, I'm thinking about as well to mention many people who never worked this way and wrote. Louis Zukowski at one point was a Zamboni driver, Ted Greenwald, taxi driver, cook at certain points, I believe, janitor, eventually got into the gallery scene. But this is not a critique that is applied to people outside of generally an academic or institutional, that alignment that they are intentionally working towards under the mechanics of what capitalism says you're supposed to do, to accrue capital culturally and fiscally. So I want to be very clear, not to slight every person's job and say like, yeah, whatever. It is important to bear in mind with critiques even like this, some of their grandiosity or scale, to not offend people, but also to recognize capitalism is doing something here with this having to pay bills, having to do certain things. Even there, all of us are being programmed and prevented or altered from a different type of way of living or even actions that we can take on. And we're being throttled by this. This is part of where our time is being taken up, and something to bear in mind when we're thinking about a revolutionary dynamic, that to any time we have left over, right? And then I be careful because I don't want to start sounding like Derrida or anything like that. But given time,
Thank you so much. I I was going to say, going back to your silence and listening, that's something I've incorporated into my own poetic practice. Spending more time quieting my mind and opening myself up to the hearing of being has been really, really helpful to me in incorporating, my psychopolitical positioning into my poetic practice. Um, okay, Matt, I want to talk about nightmare. Confronting these topics inherently means exposure to an eclipsing darkness, which I see especially in Interrogation Days and Travis. How do you balance the work of transcribing nightmare to a vision on the page? And more broadly, is inhabiting nightmare always necessary in order to write urgent poems under crisis?
Yeah, nightmare is something I think about a lot as a concept. I mean, on a literal level, like, for decades, I've sort of been plagued by literal nightmares, sleep disturbance, that sort of thing. And so I guess my fascination with the term kind of began there. And I think of it as like, as I was saying with my previous response about imagination and psyche, nightmare is a psychic phenomenon. And the way I define it, sort of simply, is just that it's an experience of psychic domination, that your imagined world that you are in is one where you are not free and you are trapped, and something hostile is going to work on you. And you cannot see any possibility that is desirable. And your ability to project meaning and joy and any of that is completely just gone. And nightmare is something that we often can experience then in waking life. It was a nightmare. It's where I feel my world has closed down completely. I cannot imagine anything good. I am simply subjected to this horrifying image. The world picture that we are given on the daily basis, almost by the news, is largely nightmarish. I guess it really depends on how you engage the news, how you engage social media, how you think about these things. But, we all kind of know the laundry list here and which, like, just this weekend with, bombing Iran, the ongoing genocide in Gaza, genocide in Sudan. Um, we can list all of these things, what we've seen happening with the total sort of dismantling of uh, offices in our government, the eliminating care, assault on trans people, ICE, and all of this. You could go on, and then underneath all of this, climate change, the sixth extinction, these truly world historic events that constantly threaten to close down every vision of the future we might want. That is nightmarish. And so I start to think like, well, what is the point or function of a poem in the face of something like that? Like, if I say that, like, artists are involved in a sort of resistance on terms of imagination, um, it you could very easily throw up your arms and just say, well, that resistance is pretty weak. It's not getting much done. So what is the point? And so for me, on a personal level, I see it. I mean, if you totally give in to the nightmare, you're experiencing like psychic death of some sort. Like your mind, like you've become a doomer, you're just completely hopeless. You can let these images from the world completely override you, and you can make yourself utterly miserable. I've done it. Probably many of you have done it as well. And so part of the personal answer for me is writing poetry or engaging in any type of imaginative work is a way of pushing back, sort of seizing the means of my own psychic production. So I'm not just inscribed upon. I'm starting to do something back. I'm refusing to just shut off into apathy, refusing to give in to give in to the nightmare. The other thing is like the temptation to just tune it out, to just be like, well, I just stopped watching the news. It just made me miserable. I mean, sometimes you have to do that. I've been doing it a bit lately. But this also is like you're conceding history to the enemy to some extent. You're conceding, like, part of what a poet is doing with their sort of the psychic activity within their work is it's a historical activity. They're bringing imagination into history in a position of resistance and preservation and witness, an attempt to sort of digest and reorient within this nightmare and hopefully leave some record of the truth, both literal truths and just sort of a imaginative truth, that I can see the world as something that is not destined for nightmare, that the bastards will not win. Like we still have something sane and with room for gentleness and all of the things that this sort of repugnant, punitive activity that the ruling class inflicts on us through the media, that we can see through that, and there's a power in that. And so nightmare and understanding that is part of like positioning oneself, I think. This question about is nightmare like the only mode for serious, but I'd written an essay called The Ghost Mind Explodes that I basically still agree with, but there's a few passages in there that suggest that like serious poetry needs to engage the nightmare, basically. And if you're not doing that, you're maybe you're dodging a little bit. I don't really think that way. I do think someone needs to do it. Like somebody needs to be going into this. We need to be aware of this as a sort of a psychic reality of our times, that this sort of that is what the fascists want. They want to give us a world picture that is so repugnant that we either give up, give in, or just die off. Like it is an assault on the ability to envision the world. And so being touched by that is, I think, an important part of a political awakening. But one can do political work as a poet without writing about it. You don't have to write nightmarish poems. I've written a lot of them. I read some earlier today. I think that like you don't have to be transcribing nightmare. I'm talking to myself here, but anyone else who maybe feels the same. And you can write whatever you want. You can find your own freedom within the poetry, and then through material ways in the way you publish, you can do political work. You can do fundraising. You can simply refuse to engage with certain publishing practices. The sort of material positioning of your work as like how it circulates in the world is politically significant. And I think that a person can be conscious of this nightmarish thing, but write poems about whatever they want, and then still consider themselves sort of an anti-establishment person because of the affiliations that they have, the affiliations they don't have, and the choices that they make in how they publish. But yeah, I mean, when I was reading those poems earlier, I mean, they're painful in a way. Like I don't like the way they make me feel, and you can't do that all the time. Um, yeah.
I think that leads into we're running a little long on time, so what I'm gonna do is pose this last question and then open us up for Q&A. Um, so I've spent so much time in private discussion with both of you about the politics of publishing. So Matt, you totally led us into this question. That this practice of writing these urgent poems and essays can sometimes alienate a poet from many literary magazines. Through your work and your presses, both of you have fostered this great sense of community. You've gathered poets from all walks of life that feel this same sense of crisis, of the call to fuse their poetic voice with political action. I'll start with Thom, but I'd like to hear from both of you. Can you talk a little bit about your journey in publishing, especially over the last few years? How do you confront this wall that acts as a censor to works that call out genocide and state violence?
Hopefully you all can hear me. It's gotten a little glitchy on my end. In the past, 2 years, I've been firmly working to ensure alignment with, PACBI values, both as an editor and as a participant in an American university situation. So there is already some contact with that. And I'm thinking about, I will be selective, not to name the names of any publications necessarily, but I'm highly conscious of both where to publish, just from a professional mindset, something you learn over time. You don't just submit everywhere, you submit to what's relevant. But nowadays, what's relevant tends to sometimes lean into the possibility of it being an echo chamber, but you have to wonder about the readership of most every magazine being in some way, shape, or form an echo chamber or microcosmic. It's ecosystemic, whatever it does, especially if it attracts following. So I actually reject a lot of the idea of feeling any, not that there is not a wall against this material, because how can I necessarily even say that? Right now, I don't have piles of work sitting around. Most everything has been accepted. Most everything is going to be, is come out or is coming out. And, thank God for that. It's, what a miracle. But it's targeting the correct venues, targeting the places that are most likely going to work with this type of material or understand or appreciate it. Because, there's a lot of room to distribute these in other ways. We recently, with Joe Hall's project, all the money went to the Samir project. And I'm thinking back to what Matt was saying. If I get paid royalties like I did with my prior book and do now, I can give all of this money away and have been doing this, remediation. And so even if the work is not necessarily going to reach this wide mass audience, I don't necessarily think my political writing needs to go that far into the public as compared to my public action, etc. It's targeting, and I don't work with, and that's to be even more clear, I do not truck with charging writers, even where you are ameliorating it. Like, there are many ways. There are ways I can appreciate and understand it, but contest systems, pay us $7 to read your poem, etc., like this, and they never are. A lot of them aren't. Being really averse to this culture too has led me to find there are so many publications, both print and digital, that don't have submission fees, that self-fund, that responsibly establish themselves in order to be perpetually, in many ways, capable, like a micropress generally is, of supporting the work that they're putting out, maintaining their mission without relying upon going this way or that way. So there's all sorts of ways in which these things cathect to be honing in, where I submit these materials. And I'm not, that's the other, like, I'm not so stupid to know that if I submit to some, I'm trying to think about a magazine name that I can say that is a little easy, but God, Poetry Northwest is not necessarily going to want some poem about intestines dangling in trees and all of this, torture documentation. They might very well take it, but you have to be logical, because this is coming back even to something that Matt talks about, and something I'm thinking about after Matt's last question is you have to take care of yourself. And I view myself as an artist. And this is a dynamic that is very much 100% of my time is spent towards some or other end in this way. If I were to be going crazy, spending thousands of dollars a year on submission fees, first of all, I wouldn't be able to run Blue Bag, but I also would be constantly rejected. And if I didn't have this mentality, or if I wasn't being logical and like learning and developing over the past several years, you learn to take care of yourself in these ways. So being targeted and being focused and knowing what will work. And even today, you get the occasional rejection because it's not a good fit. And furthermore, you have to have confidence as well in what you're doing. You can't, this is like, look at me, right? This is not a situation globally where I can be trepidatious or afraid. Yes, I'm allowed to be, and there are times that I am, times that I'm very distressed. But I have to be very, rational and know where I can be there for other people. So thinking as well about the urgency question, to be really quick in wrapping this up, that you touched upon earlier, a lot of this type of writing that I specifically produce, my production aesthetically happens to be generally very, very politicized. Exactly as Matt was saying earlier, you don't necessarily have to be 100% of the time political, though you should at all points of view in many ways have some demonstration that you're not ignorant or totally overlooking something. I seek to have these materials out as rapidly as possible because I don't want them to be historiographical. I want them to be making an intervention as close to when they take place. And the same thing is a lot of the paradigm with Blue Bag Press is digital publications. I have the means to use an internet platform and share the work near immediately after it goes through a brief editorial interchange with the people, and not sit there 6-7 months later, put this work out. Pay attention to this. The amount of gatekeeping and maintenance being done also there in publication today, is a big put off to being in places. I don't want to be in a place that's gatekeeping in that way, shape, or form. And that's not to say publishing 12 people in a magazine is gatekeeping. But there are a lot of people I can think of that have a digital platform and they withhold the capability that has. And so just practicing through this, doing as much as I can, very maximally. And this is because I have the capacity to do this. I'm in a PhD program. I receive income through this. I have this means. So instead of sitting on my ass and not doing it, I made the choice to do this fucking work and get it done. I have a lot of appreciation and respect. And there are a lot of publications I can think of right now. Matt's is one of them. But even places like Noir Sana get after this, and not always necessarily the most social conditionally political, but the way that practice works there. I mean, Mercury Fur's 6th issue stacked with an incredible amount of writing, and that one I was really inspired by the number of writers that were there. It really felt like a way of capturing something, capturing what's going on, capturing what people are thinking through. So, yet again, just my ambling trajectory through thought.
So I want to pick up there at the end on this question of confidence, I guess. So I went through the whole academic game. Like when I was younger, as far as publishing goes. So like when I was younger, I just had an allergy to publishing. I just hated the entire process. I just hated it. I never submitted work. And then around age 35, I was like, all right, I'm going to really make an attempt here. I'm going to really try to do this. And for a few years, I did that whole thing of like having a submittable account, sending out books to contests and shit. And it made me miserable. And I did not like any of it. It was expensive. And I kept thinking like, this is just my own personal gripe I've got to get over. Like, this is my hang up. This is the way it goes. I got to get over it. And then I started to think about just sort of money. I just started to think about the material aspects of how these publications work and how funding works. And I don't want to go off, that's a whole can of worms, but like, I started to realize that this isn't just my hang up. This is actually a completely bogus way of doing things. You know, waiting for 6 months or a year to get feedback, books that come out 2 years after they're accepted, you know, all of the reading fees I paid and stuff. And I decided then that the book that I had written that was going to be my, um, you know, at that time I was like, okay, if I can get this published with a reputable press, as it's worded, then I can put that on my CV and be employable. And I decided, well, you know what? I'm just going to put this out as a free PDF, which to my to most of my academic colleagues' mind would have just been like, well, Jesus, you just threw it all away, right? But as soon as I did that, I was just like free. I just felt this enormous energy. And I started writing more and more. And I realized that that process was totally had a stranglehold on so much of my imagination. It was a way in which the imaginative work I was doing was like tethered to this garbage. And getting away from that was just really freeing. And then I was like, all right, well, I'm not just going to do PDFs. I'm going to print up some of my books. And that was 2022. And then in 2023, I was like, all right, I'm going to start publishing other people. So this is Dead Mall Press. And so much of my interest in doing that was really, other than just having the, you know, having it all in my own hands and not having to worry about, well, who is this editor? Like, what is this press really doing? Like, where does their money come from? Because it just felt like there was so much concealed. You couldn't find you couldn't find very much about money, but you would discover like, oh yeah, you know, like whatever, like Narrative and Rattle magazine. And, you know, there's just all these sort of stories of these like, you know, like sort of like just really bad funding situations. And so I was like, I want to have that under my control, but also be transparent about it. Like, here's exactly how much it costs to make this booklet. Here's who's involved in it. You know, here's how much money I made. Here's how many books sold. And here's the balance. Because I think people get really deluded about how many books actually sell. Like, I mean, a micropress that puts out 35 to 100 copies of their book, that's not that much less than some of these books that have print runs of 1,000 or so. Like a university press print run that's in some cases like, okay, well, the university mandates that we'll give you the money to print 1,000 books, and we're giving you that money, and we need you to print the 1,000 books. There is no demand for those books. They might sell 150, 200, 250 of those books. A lot of them get pulped. And, you know, people put so much of their lives into, my book got accepted. I went through all of the steps and my book got accepted. I won the prize. And then the sense of how much reach that has. Like, poetry simply cannot have an impact on mass culture. Or like an individual poetry book, except for very, very, very rare cases. The idea that you're going to impact mass culture relative to like any video game or, you know, a movie, music is just so minuscule. So how many books do you really need printed? How much money do you really need to get this national push? And I think that the expectation that we need that national culture is imposed a lot of times by funders. Like, does anyone know what the Poetry Coalition is? Like, the Poetry Coalition is this umbrella organization that ties in like 30 different publishers and presses and orgs and gets tons of money from like the Mellon Foundation, which is run by a former poet laureate. And they sort of program a lot of national poetry events, these poet laureate programs that are basically, you know, we say like an individual poet or individual book of poetry may not have national impact, but the donors tied in with the state do have a vision of a national poetry culture that is a form of civic verse that basically is like, you are modeling the glories of democracy and US citizenship by, doing our programs and, reading your poems. And it was taken down under the Trump administration, but there was this article written on the State Department website by the guy, I can't remember what he runs. Poet who runs some translation program that was basically like, poetry is diplomacy. Diplomats need empathy. These are values that the State Department and poets share. We all should be together in like this vision of like these liberal values that end up having a sort of imperial slant to them. And so I just want out of all of that. And I just think that asking questions about funding is the first place that anyone starts. And to as much that like self-publishing is not the end, man. Like self-publishing is like, well, I won't sell that many books. Just keep in mind that so many books get pulled. If they put out the numbers and we saw how many books were sold, that like, oh, whatever, like, again, I don't want to put press on blast, but like, what's something garbage? Like, okay, so like Copper Canyon. Like Copper Canyon put something out. And it's like, how many do they sell? And if it was like, okay, well, it's not as many as I thought, people might start to see through. I'm not saying that everything that they publish is garbage, but the way that I've seen their funding, it's not what I want to be involved in. And I think that that professionalization and the way that it very subtly gets tied into these networks of funding that do have a very specific sort of way of disciplining poetic culture, that drawing a line against that is what I want my press to do, what I am interested in seeing and other way other people publish. And yeah, I'll slow down there.
I tag on thinking about too, and in the comments what MC was saying, and this idea of the way in which especially university and nonprofit publishing, with mass institutional money for nonprofit, certain nonprofits, not every single one, those that receive, massive grants from the US, government, for a variety of reasons, have the means to produce these massive runs of books again. And truly, like scores of these, like, and unrelated to any disagreements, I can tell you, Ray Armentrout, printings from Wesleyan University Press, virtually every single one of those books straight to the remainder bin after it gets delivered to the bookstore, because they're sending out like 20, 30 of these copies sometimes to bookstores, and people are not buying this material. Even her brand new book, go figure, was remaindered within like a month or so, and you could get it for $5 as compared to like $18 or whatever. And these systems function really well because even poets and publishers don't know how bookstores work. They don't know how the publishing system works. They don't know what it looks like. It takes a lot of research and digging and exposition to figure this fact out. And so you go like what MC is describing in the chat again, and what the, sometimes MFA trajectory and like the dream of being a poet or creative writing instructor might entail, or even an academic, this idea that you have to, books onto the CV, you have to be doing all this. And they manipulate this perspective to make that look better than what people like us are doing, and many other presses, again, scores and scores of presses. This is not new, what either of us are necessarily doing. There's a long history. In fact, it's really the real history of publication. It's not always been so tethered institutionally in many ways. And this is like something we combat against. And then it's always the powerful force of the larger press saying, no. And I'm disconcerted by these lies and lack of transparency, especially when people are asking for tens of thousands of dollars from the general public now to replace institutional funding in the United States. I'm concerned. I'm also concerned because we're all generally of limited means. And there are people in my local community and organizations here or organizations implicated in, genocide by the US imperial war machine that really need my money that I have the means to give away. And I don't even know if partitioning it off is appropriate so much as there is a severe irresponsibility by institutional publication today towards the general public, towards authors, towards the culture of any form of art in general, this capitalist manipulation. And so, yeah, I would call for a lot of differentiated publication practices. And, shout out MC is one of the people that is into this. My friend Joe Hall, even people, there's a troll thread recently, Gauss, there's so many examples of this type of alternative publication that heavily combats this institutional manipulation. And it's something that, again, really takes time. I mean, you could start with stuff like Juliana Spar's Du Bois Telegram for some of this, but still, you're going to need to you even have to follow sales trends. I mean, I'm chronically on AbeBooks looking at stuff like new things that are posted because I'm trying to find books that I collect, right? And so I see this stuff. I track the sales trends even, and doing book sales in private, this comes up a lot. And this is also a way in which institutions cultivate who they say are the real poets, or establishing and dictating the conversation. I don't know Ray Armantrout is really dictating a conversation, even though she has the chronic contract at Wesleyan University Press that presumably leads to her getting speaking events that pay her money, pay her lodging, pay her travel to get to places and get exposure, perpetuate her career, royalties for the book, etc. I don't know she's really that influential, because everybody I talk to in general that's young, I mean, we can appreciate some of her work, but it's like, what's really new necessarily here? Meanwhile, scores and scores of people produce. And this idea that you have like 10 to 15 really strong presses that your book can come out, or else you're really not a part of a certain community that is, again, positioned as determining a conversation. They're constantly showing up in all of the magazines, being interviewed, being reviewed, the apparatus around it. This is all this biofeedback, but these institutional presses are really creating and maintaining this paradigm. And I mean, there's a recent history of this with a lot of poets that formed some of these systems, and a lot of poets who went from leftist member of the counterculture and right into heavy, intense academic alignment. Lynn Haginian would be one of those people. While I admire and am influenced myself by the work, I am also not unaware that scores of Haginian students have gone across the planet and entered into academia. And so you really have these singular nodes that are controlling cultural production. And there has to be, in some ways, alignment with the people who run these nodes. It's not a socialist system. It is not progressive in any way, shape, or form. It is about the individual and their cultural capital.
Thank you so much, both of you. I'll end on this note that I sort of jotted down while we were in discussion and during your readings. One reason we're all gathered here tonight, I think, is because we feel grief on a near daily basis. Grief, desperation, a sense of impotence in the face of cascading devastation that's live streamed to us in real time. Grief for an entire planet, for the human lives discarded like trash every single day that touches every part of our being, from the microplastics in my bloodstream to the radiation infecting the dirt of this stolen land we occupy. To deny this grief is to become numb to it and does a disservice to our shared humanity, to our psyche, to our imagination. And I'm here to say that action can be an antidote to some of these feelings. Action is hard. It should be easy. But the institutions in place exist in part to be a barrier against meaningful action. Your poetic practice can be a part of your meaningful action. Writing from imagination is psychic resistance. There's power in the poetic voice that summons strength and determination from your psychopolitical positioning. I want to thank you, both of you, Thom and Matt, for being here tonight. I want to thank our amazing audience for being here tonight. At this point, I'm going to pause recording and open the floor up for questions or comments if anybody has anything they want to chime in.